When the world celebrates the warrior, it always shows the clash, the fire, the noise of victory, but it rarely shows what comes after, the silence, the years that follow when a man is left alone with the sound of his own thoughts. The legend of Miyamoto Musashi is not only written in battles, it is written in the quiet between them, in the discipline of solitude, in the art of strategy, in the mastery of self. He was more than a swordsman. He was a philosopher shaped by violence, a man who realized that the sharpest blade is the one that cuts through illusion. His story is not about winning. It's about understanding what it means to fight at all. Musashi was born in 1584, in a time when Japan was made of swords. Chaos and ambition shaped every man's destiny. At 13, he fought his first duel and killed. From then on, he walked from province to province, seeking stronger opponents, perfecting the rhythm of death. He fought over 60 duels, never defeated, yet the more he won, the more he lost something inside himself. With each victory, a silence began to grow, a silence that asked, what remains when no one is left to fight? That question haunted him more than any sword. It followed him until the day he walked away from battle forever. That decision marked the beginning of his real journey, the path that leads inward, the path that has no enemy. Shed Chapter 1. The Discipline of Solitude. Part 1. Silence after the sword. When the last duel ended, the crowd was silent. A man stood in the middle of an empty field, the air heavy with dust and the smell of iron. He had won again, but even in victory, there was no joy, only stillness. That man was Miyamoto Musashi, a warrior who had never been defeated, and yet, in that moment, he realized that winning had lost its meaning, because when every battle ends the same, victory becomes another form of repetition. He looked at his sword, the same blade that had brought him glory, and saw in its reflection a truth he could no longer ignore. Every enemy he had cut down had led him closer to one final opponent, himself. That day, Musashi walked away from the battlefield. No farewell, no witness, no announcement, just the sound of his footsteps fading into the wind. He traveled alone, carrying nothing but a wooden sword and a few worn scrolls. No destination, no honor to claim, only the desire to understand what strength really was. The mountains received him in silence, and in that silence, he began to hear things he had never noticed before. The rhythm of the wind, the pulse of his own heartbeat, the faint whisper of thought itself. For the first time, he trained without an audience. No challengers, no reputation to protect. Only the endless repetition of motion. Draw, strike, breathe, stillness. To those watching from the outside, it might have seemed like he had abandoned his purpose. But in truth, he was beginning to understand it. Because Musashi had started to see that the greatest battles are not fought for survival, but for clarity. Discipline, he realized, was not about perfection. It was about awareness, the ability to remain steady while everything else demands movement. Some people call solitude a punishment. Musashi called it a forge. In the stillness of his cave, he studied himself the way he once studied his enemies. Every habit became visible, every fear, every doubt, every whisper of ego. There was no one left to compare himself to, only the mirror of his own consciousness. And perhaps that is where true mastery begins, not when you are better than others, but when you can face yourself without turning away. He wrote in his notes, "Perceive that which cannot be seen. Seek that which cannot be named to him." This was not poetry. It was instruction. Every breath was an exercise in focus. Every step, a reminder of impermanence. The wind moved through the bamboo outside his cave, and he would pause, watching how it bent, but never broke. That was discipline. The quiet strength that comes not from resistance, but from adaptation. You can almost picture him there, seated on a flat stone floor, surrounded by paper, ink, and silence. His movements slow, deliberate, as if the act of writing were a duel against distraction. He no longer chased greatness. He chased balance. And as his body stilled, his mind began to move more clearly than ever before. That's the paradox of solitude. You think it isolates you, but it actually reveals how deeply connected you are to everything else. Musashi didn't reject the world. He just wanted to understand it without noise. Maybe that's why he stopped fighting, because the greatest clarity comes not from victory, but from the silence that follows it. Think about it. When the noise stops in your own life, when the arguments end, when the proving is over, can you stay in that silence? Or do you reach for the next battle, just to feel alive again? Musashi chose differently. He chose to listen, and in that listening, he began to hear the rhythm of his own mind, the same rhythm that would later shape his writings, his art, his life. The silence after the sword became his teacher. Part 2. The shape of discipline. It is said that repetition dulls the mind, but for Musashi, it sharpened it. Every motion became a study of attention, every mistake a doorway. Alone in the mountains, he began to discover the architecture of his own discipline. It was not built from rules, but from rhythm. He would wake before dawn, train until the horizon burned gold, then sit in stillness for hours. No one watched, no one praised. And yet every strike of his wooden sword carried the weight of devotion. He learned that practice is not about improvement. It is about alignment. To repeat an action until it dissolves the self who performs it. He once wrote, "There is nothing outside of you that can ever make you better." That was his understanding of training. To master the self by exhausting it. To strip away everything unnecessary until only awareness remains. Discipline, for Musashi, was not punishment. It was purification. Every day he would perform the same sequence. Draw, cut, breathe, return. The motion itself became prayer. There was no enemy anymore, no audience, only the confrontation between attention and distraction. He realized that distraction is not external. It is born from resistance. When you stop resisting the moment, concentration becomes natural. That was his secret. Not control, but surrender. He began to move like nature, repetitive, patient, unhurried. The stream does not rush. The wind does not strive. And yet both carve mountains. That is discipline, to move with consistency, not urgency. The world moves fast. The disciplined move steady. Tell me, how much of your life is motion without rhythm? How much energy is lost in trying to get somewhere faster? Musashi's stillness was not absence. It was presence stretched across time. The more he trained, the less he tried. And in that paradox, mastery revealed itself. Part 3. The weight of stillness. Solitude changes a man. It strips him bare. There is no mirror to flatter you, no applause to remind you who you are, just silence and what you do inside it. For Musashi, that silence became both a teacher and an adversary. Some days, it was peace. Some days, it was unbearable. He learned that discipline is not always noble. Sometimes it is survival. The mind resists stillness because it fears what it might reveal. But Musashi stayed. He stayed through the noise of his own thoughts, through boredom, through doubt. And little by little, the noise began to soften. He wrote, "When you understand the way broadly, you see it in all things." That line was not the conclusion. It was the symptom of stillness. The more he saw, the less he separated. The mountain, the sword, the ink, they were all expressions of the same rhythm. The weight of stillness began to turn into clarity. When nothing distracts you, you start to see what actually drives you. It is uncomfortable because it shows you your illusions. He saw his pride, his fear of obscurity, his attachment to victory. He saw that even solitude can become vanity if you cling to it. And so, he let that go too. Eventually, there was nothing left to defend. Only breathing, only rhythm. Stillness became motion. Motion became stillness. That was the way. Part 4. Reflection. He once said, "You can only understand the way by living it." In the end, solitude was never about isolation. It was about integration. Musashi had learned to live without division, between mind and body, between silence and movement, between self and world. His cave was not a prison. It was a mirror. And what he saw reflected there was not a warrior, but a man learning how to be. When he finally stepped out of the mountains, he no longer carried a sword in search of opponents. He carried silence in search of understanding. And that silence spoke louder than any victory. The discipline of solitude had taught him the only mastery that matters, the mastery of the self. Chapter 2. The Art of Strategy. Part 1. Seeing without looking. Musashi used to say, "The truth of strategy is to see what is invisible." Most people think strategy begins with the eyes, with observation, with focus, with anticipation. But Musashi discovered that real vision begins when the eyes are no longer leading the mind. Seeing is not looking. Looking is movement. Seeing is awareness. In battle, most men reacted to what they saw. A twitch of a hand, a shift of weight, the glint of a blade. But Musashi learned to see intention, to sense motion before it began. This was not intuition. It was perception stripped of noise. He wrote, "Perception is strong, and sight is weak," and that line carried a lifetime of training. He had learned that the mind, if still enough, can see further than the eye. Tell me, have you ever made a decision before you could explain why? That's not chance. That's awareness moving faster than thought. Musashi trained to live in that space. The gap between seeing and reacting, the silence where clarity lives. Every movement of his sword was preceded by that pause, a breath, a stillness, and then the strike, precise, effortless, inevitable. To the untrained, it looked supernatural. To him, it was simply rhythm. Because strategy, at its core, is rhythm. Everything has one. The sea, the wind, the human mind. When you learn to feel it, you no longer need to predict the future. You move with it. That's what seeing without looking truly means. It's not blindness. It's freedom from distraction. In the noise of life, the mind jumps from one image to another, chasing meaning, avoiding silence. Musashi's training reversed that instinct. He practiced not following what caught his attention. He would stand in a forest for hours, watching the light move through leaves, waiting for his mind to stop naming what it saw. Only then, he said, could he truly see. That level of awareness turns the world into a mirror. Every opponent, every sound, every movement, they all reflect you. And that's the hardest truth in strategy. You don't fight the enemy's habits. You fight your own reactions to them. That's why Musashi no longer trained just to strike faster. He trained to stop reacting altogether, he wrote, "The mind must not stop with the body. The body must move with the mind." Simple words, but they describe a state few people ever reach, when thought and motion become one rhythm, to act without hesitation, to perceive without confusion, to see without looking. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But ask yourself, how much of your life is reaction? How much of what you call choice is just you responding to what's loudest around you? Musashi's mastery was not about control. It was about liberation from noise. When you no longer chase every thought, clarity becomes natural. That is when vision begins, not with the eyes, but with silence. And that silence, Musashi believed, was the birthplace of true strategy. Part 2. The flow of mind. He once wrote, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain." He was no longer speaking only about fighting. He meant that truth, in battle, in art, in life, has many forms, but a single essence: rhythm. Every movement in the universe has rhythm. The swing of a sword, the fall of rain, even the pause between two breaths. Musashi studied that rhythm obsessively. When he struck, it was never too early, never too late. Not because he calculated perfectly, but because he felt the flow of time. He moved with the current, not against it. Most warriors fought like stones thrown into a river. Musashi became the water itself. Tell me, have you ever tried to force something to happen? A conversation, a plan, a success? The harder you pushed, the heavier it became, didn't it? Strategy works the same way. The mind, when tense, narrows. When relaxed, it sees everything. Musashi trained for that state, a balance between tension and release. He called it moving without thought. It didn't mean acting blindly. It meant allowing instinct and intellect to merge into one rhythm. He believed that when the mind and body move together, action becomes effortless, and effort becomes invisible. This was not a philosophy of ease. It was a discipline of presence. Every swing, every breath, every blink became an opportunity to test alignment, to see if he was still in flow or drifting into ego. When you are not in rhythm, he said, even your strength becomes your weakness. That line, simple as it sounds, describes every failure in human life. We lose rhythm when we rush. We lose rhythm when we resist. We lose rhythm when we forget to listen. Musashi listened to the world constantly. The wind against stone, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves. Everything was teaching him timing. He saw that strategy is not control. It is cooperation with what is. That's why he never depended on a single technique. He created two-sword combat not to innovate, but to remind himself that mastery requires flexibility. He learned to switch hands mid-fight, to adapt to distance, to feel rhythm instead of forcing it. To fight without strategy, he wrote, is to drift without wind. But to cling to one strategy is to break when the current changes. Flow demands humility. You cannot be the master of rhythm until you are willing to follow it. Think about your own life for a moment. Where do you resist the current? Where do you tighten your grip on things that are already moving away? The mind's greatest illusion is that it can force timing. Musashi learned to let timing reveal itself. When his opponent hesitated, he moved. When the wind shifted, he waited. He didn't control the fight. He harmonized with it. That harmony was his real weapon. In that flow, even thought became unnecessary. Strategy wasn't something he performed. It was something he became. The swords, the strikes, the silence, all expressions of the same rhythm. And in that rhythm, there was no Musashi, no enemy, no victory, only awareness moving through form. He wrote, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in all things. The flow of mind, that was the way. Tell me, can you sense when you're out of rhythm? In your thoughts, in your words, in the way you move through your own days? If you can, that is the first step towards strategy. Because strategy is not just about what you do, it's about how clearly you sense the flow that carries everything, including you." Part 3. The rhythm of decision. Timing decides everything. That was Musashi's first rule of combat, and, later, of life. He wrote, "You win not by force, but by rhythm." Most people think rhythm means speed, but for Musashi, rhythm was balance, the alignment between observation and action. To act too soon is to reveal yourself. To act too late is to disappear. Between those 2 points lies mastery. He once said that to know rhythm is to know the heartbeat of the world. That rhythm was not just heard, it was felt in the tension of silence, in the shift of air, in the hesitation before movement. He would stand for hours with his sword drawn, waiting for the exact moment when intent became visible, not in the body, but in the breath. The instant the opponent's breath broke, Musashi moved. No thought, no hesitation, just timing, pure, invisible, inevitable. That was his art. But timing is not only for battle. Think about your own life. How often do you rush to speak when silence would say more? How often do you act out of fear of missing the moment, only to realize the moment was never yours to control? Musashi understood that hesitation and impulsiveness were 2 sides of the same weakness. Both come from attachment, the need to control outcome. To find true rhythm, he learned to trust uncertainty. The mind that trusts can wait. The mind that doubts must always move. That's why stillness was part of his training. Stillness sharpened perception. In stillness, he could sense timing not as calculation, but as awareness. Strategy, he realized, is not deciding what to do. It's recognizing when everything else has already decided for you. When you attain the way, he wrote, you see timing in all things. In that state, even a single heartbeat feels like eternity, wide enough to make the right move, clear enough to do nothing at all. Sometimes doing nothing is the strategy. Waiting, for Musashi, was not passive, it was active stillness, patience sharpened into precision. He called it no hesitation, not because he never paused, but because his pauses had purpose. The man who rushes breaks rhythm. The man who waits carelessly loses it. The man who listens becomes it. You've felt this before, haven't you? When you know, without knowing why, that it's time to act, or time to stop. That moment of clarity, that silent alignment, that is the rhythm Musashi lived by. He found it in battle, but it applied to everything. When to speak, when to walk away, when to stop seeking. All are forms of strategy. The way is not in thinking, he wrote. It is in doing, and in not doing. That line unsettles most people, because the modern mind fears stillness. It confuses it with inaction. But Musashi's stillness was not absence. It was readiness. Every fiber of him awake, waiting for the world to move first. And when it did, he was already there. Calm, invisible, inevitable. The rhythm of decision had become his nature. Tell me, when was the last time you waited? Not because you were afraid, but because you were aware. Can you hold that silence long enough for the right moment to reveal itself? That's where strategy lives. Not in motion, not in planning, but in the heartbeat between the two. That is where Musashi found his clarity, in the rhythm of decision. Part 4. The Dialogue of Awareness. Musashi wrote, is not about war. It's about perception. The opponent is not out there. He's inside your reaction. Once you understand that, every battle becomes a lesson in awareness. But tell me, when was the last time you noticed your own mind before it moved? We think we act consciously, but most of the time we are already reacting. Musashi trained to end that delay. He wanted his mind and body to move together, without conflict, without confusion. When you attain the way, he wrote, you will see through all things. That line isn't mystical, it's mechanical. To see through means to stop mistaking surface for substance, to look beyond what the moment seems to be asking for. Most people respond to the moment they see. Musashi responded to the moment that was coming. He saw patterns before they formed, tension before it peaked, endings before they began. How? Because he stopped separating himself from the world. The strategist who sees himself as separate is always late. The one who feels himself within the pattern never needs to rush. That's awareness, not the knowledge of things, but the intimacy with rhythm. Tell me, have you ever walked into a room and felt the tension before anyone spoke? Have you sensed someone's anger before they even raised their voice? That is awareness. And if you train it, you stop being surprised by life. Musashi's awareness came from discipline, but it grew into something deeper: compassion. He realized that to understand rhythm is to understand suffering. Every person moves according to their own imbalance. Every decision is a defense against pain. When he fought, he wasn't destroying the opponent. He was understanding their rhythm and showing them its limit. You must see the way in all professions, he said. Strategy is the science of understanding the spirit of things. In the end, Musashi's strategy wasn't about victory. It was about seeing without distortion, the world as it is, and the self within it. The longer he studied awareness, the less he needed to act. He began to win by doing less, by moving less, by thinking less, until one day, the act of seeing itself became enough. He didn't fight to survive anymore. He observed to understand. That's the highest form of strategy, when perception replaces control. Look at your own life. How much energy do you spend trying to control what is already happening? How much peace do you lose reacting to what you cannot change? Musashi would say, stop trying to win every moment. Listen instead. Watch how things unfold without your interference. You might notice that they don't need your effort, only your clarity, because clarity itself changes outcomes. When you are clear, people calm around you. When you are silent, noise loses its power. When you move with awareness, chaos begins to organize itself. That is strategy, not dominance, not superiority. Alignment, the way of rhythm, the flow of mind, the art of timing. All of it leads to this one point: the recognition that nothing is separate. You are the rhythm you're trying to control. Musashi saw that truth and never turned away again. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you can see it too. Not as an idea, not as philosophy, but as awareness. The awareness that strategy is not a tool for power. It's a mirror for understanding. When you stop trying to win, you begin to see. And when you begin to see, you have already won. Because clarity is victory. Chapter 3. The Scrolls of the Way. Part 1. The Book of Earth. The way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death. That is how Musashi began. The Book of Earth, not with glory, not with victory, but with surrender. To understand strategy, he said, you must first understand the ground you stand on. Earth is foundation. It is the thing beneath all things. Your body, your balance, your discipline. Without it, nothing you build can last. Musashi was not talking about literal soil. He was talking about knowing where you are and what you are built upon. He believed every person must find their own stance in life, not just in combat, but in purpose. Because without stance, perception collapses. In strategy, he wrote, you must learn to perceive both the distant and the near as one. That means, don't get lost in the small, don't forget the large. The warrior who cannot see both is blind. Earth teaches patience. It does not move quickly, but it moves everything. In the same way, Musashi's foundation was patience. He knew that every action, every reaction, must grow from a center that doesn't shift. Tell me, do you have such a center? Or do you move with every pressure, every opinion, every change of weather? Musashi trained not to become hard, but to become grounded, grounded enough to move freely. The Book of Earth was his reminder that strength without roots is just noise. In those pages, he spoke of posture, of breathing, of alignment, but every line points to the same truth. Mastery begins with knowing where you stand. He wrote, the way is in training. To most readers, that sounds like repetition, but to Musashi, it meant presence. To train is to live awake. Every strike, every step, every mistake, all are lessons written into the body. Earth accepts all things equally. The seed, the rain, the rot, the bloom. It does not choose. Musashi wanted his mind to be like that, accepting of whatever the moment brought, unshaken by success or failure. He understood that awareness is not about control. It's about readiness. The ground does not resist the storm. It absorbs it. The warrior does not avoid uncertainty. He anchors within it. That's why the first book is Earth. It reminds you to return to what is stable, the breath, the step, the rhythm of your own heartbeat. All strategy begins there. Without it, the sword wavers, the thought splits, the mind fractures. Musashi's lesson is simple. Before you move, know where you stand. Before you act, understand the ground beneath your choices. Because the mind that is not grounded cannot see clearly, and the man who cannot see clearly will always mistake movement for progress. The Book of Earth ends quietly. Study this well, he wrote, and you will begin to see the way. Not in the sword, not in the enemy, but in the soil beneath your feet and the silence that supports you. Part 2. The Book of Fire and Water. In the Book of Fire, Musashi wrote about combat, but beneath the surface, he was writing about life, about motion, tension, and the spark of intent. In battle, he said, you must understand the rhythm of your opponent, and then disrupt it. Fire is the element of disruption. It consumes what stands still. It tests what is weak. To Musashi, fire was not just aggression. It was clarity in motion. The fire that destroys blindly is rage. The fire that burns precisely is awareness. He studied the flame the way he once studied swords, its shape, its hunger, its rhythm. Fire has no mercy, but it has perfect honesty. It reveals what cannot endure. Tell me, when life grows difficult, do you meet it like flame or like ash? Do you burn through resistance, or do you collapse under your own smoke? Musashi's fire was not loud. It was focused. He taught that action must be decisive, but never desperate. When you attack, he wrote, you must think of cutting through the enemy as though cutting through yourself. To him, that was not cruelty. It was honesty. The opponent is never truly separate. Every conflict is self-reflection. The fire burns both ways. That's why he trained his students to strike only when the mind was clear. No anger, no ambition, only precision. The way of the warrior, he said, is the way of death. Meaning, you must accept loss before you can move without fear. A man who fears death hesitates. A man who accepts it moves like flame, pure, formless, unstoppable. But Musashi didn't stop with fire. The next scroll was water. Water has no shape of its own. It becomes whatever holds it. The spirit of water, he wrote, is to flow freely, adapting to the shape of things. He saw that fighting rigidly, in anger, pride, or obsession, always leads to defeat. The warrior must move like water, adjusting, flowing, reshaping, without losing center. Water teaches humility. It yields, but it never stops. It can slip through the smallest crack, yet carve stone over time. That is patience. That is strategy. Tell me, when you face resistance, do you push harder, or do you flow around it? Musashi learned that true strength is not in domination, but in adaptation. He combined fire and water, aggression and balance, destruction and creation. One gives force, the other gives form. When they merge, movement becomes harmony. A man guided by fire alone burns out. A man guided only by water dissolves. The way is both, intensity and composure, heat and reflection. When you strike, he said, strike like fire. When you watch like water. That rhythm applies to everything. Speaking and listening, choosing and waiting, loving and letting go. Fire acts. Water understands. Together, they create movement without waste. And that, Musashi believed, is strategy at its purest form. Because in the end, what you destroy and what you preserve come from the same flame. The difference is whether you understand the fire or let it consume you. Part 3. The Book of Wind and Void. In the void, Musashi wrote, there is good and there is no evil. Wisdom exists, logic exists, the way exists, and the mind is empty. To most readers, those words sound like mystery, but for Musashi they were instruction. Wind and void were the final teachings, the passage from understanding technique to understanding perception itself. Wind is movement without form. It touches everything but owns nothing. Void is awareness without object. It sees everything but clings to nothing. Together, they describe the point where mastery dissolves. Musashi had studied every school of combat in Japan. Each had its style, its rhythm, its pride. He called those the winds of other schools. He respected them, but he didn't follow them, because he saw how easily men mistake tradition for truth. The spirit of other schools, he wrote, is clouded by opinion. The more you defend a method, the more you lose sight of the way itself. Tell me, how often do you confuse certainty with wisdom? Musashi learned that to stay open is harder than to stay loyal. He practiced detachment, not as rejection, but as awareness. To stand in the wind without being moved by it. To act without relying on form. That was freedom. When the mind ceases to identify with style, when it no longer protects an image of self, it begins to move like the wind, present everywhere, owned by nothing. Out of that emptiness rose the void. Void, for Musashi, was not nothingness. It was space, the space in which all things appear and disappear. In that space, action loses its weight, and perception becomes infinite. By knowing things that exist, he said, you can know that which does not. The void is the awareness that remains when there is no subject, no object, only observation itself. You cannot seek it, because seeking is movement. You cannot name it, because naming is limitation. you can only stop resisting it. That is why Musashi ended the Book of Five Rings with silence. There was nothing left to teach. The way cannot be carried in words. It can only be recognized in stillness. Think about your own struggles. The more you grasp for meaning, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you pause, when you let go of trying to know, something quiet begins to open. That opening, that unguarded moment of awareness, is the void. It's not emptiness. It's possibility. Musashi understood that when the mind becomes empty, perception becomes pure. You don't lose yourself. You lose the illusion of yourself, and what remains is rhythm, breath moving through form, wind moving through space, awareness moving through life, the way finally without division. That was Musashi's last lesson, to let the wind move freely, to let the void remain unfilled, and to understand that both were never separate from him at all. Part 4. Dokkōdō. The Path Alone. In the last winter of his life, Musashi withdrew into the cave of Vagabond. He was old now, his hair gray, his body thin, but his eyes still sharp as the edge of a blade. There, by candlelight, he wrote his final words, Dokkōdō, the way of walking alone. 21 precepts, short, unforgiving, each one the condensation of a lifetime. He wrote not for students, not for followers, but for himself. The world would remember the Book of Five Rings as his masterpiece of strategy. But Dokkōdō was something else. Not the art of war, but the art of letting go. Accept everything just the way it is. The first line, the hardest lesson. To accept reality without resistance. That was the courage even warriors feared most. For Musashi, acceptance did not mean surrender. It meant alignment. The willingness to meet life exactly as it arrives, without wanting it to be otherwise. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. Do not collect weapons or practice with an obsession for them. Each precept stripped away another layer of attachment. Possessions, reputation, desire, identity. He had spent his youth gathering victories. Now he spent his final days releasing them. Tell me, could you live like that? Could you walk away from everything that defined you? Musashi did. He gave away his swords, kept only his brush. His students visited him, but he spoke little. He only said, train your mind, not your hands. In Dokkōdō, he wrote, resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others. Even the smallest grievance, he believed, was a form of attachment, a refusal to see things as they are. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. In all things, have no preferences. These lines sound severe, almost inhuman, but Musashi was not preaching denial. He was describing balance, the state beyond wanting and rejecting. The mind that neither clings nor resists, moves freely through the world. That was freedom to him. Be indifferent to where you live. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Do not, even for a moment, think dishonestly. The farther he wrote, the quieter the text became. No rhetoric, no poetry, just clarity, the kind that can only come when everything unnecessary has been burned away. At the end of Dokkōdō, he wrote, never stray from the way. And then he put the brush down. The candle burned low. He sat upright, hands resting on his knees, eyes open, breathing steady. He was not meditating. He was simply being. The mountain was silent, the ink on the paper still wet. Outside, wind moved through the pines, the same rhythm that had guided him all his life. And somewhere in that stillness, the man disappeared into the way he had spent a lifetime seeking. Not a death of defeat, but of completion. The path alone was never about solitude. It was about unity, the merging of discipline, perception, and emptiness. Tell me, can you walk your path without applause? Can you act without being seen? Create without being remembered, live without needing to prove? That was Musashi's final question to the world. He had walked every road, the road of battle, of silence, of art. In the end, he realized they were all the same road, and the only true mastery was the ability to walk it completely alone. Chapter 4: Musashi and Vagabond, the Eternal Wanderer. Musashi's story is not just a chapter of Japanese history. It is a mirror of the human struggle itself. His life became the embodiment of solitude, conflict, and inner discipline, a journey from chaos toward clarity. Centuries later, that journey was reborn through a different art form: manga and anime. Vagabond, created by Takehiko Inoue in 1998, reimagines Musashi's life with a rare mix of brutality and grace. Based on Eiji Yoshikawa's 1935 novel Musashi, the series transforms historical legend into living philosophy. It is not a tale of a hero. It is the portrait of a man who learns that true strength lies not in victory, but in understanding. Inoue's Vagabond is not simply a retelling. It is an interpretation, one that strips away myth to reveal the man beneath. Through his ink and brush, Musashi becomes vulnerable, searching, uncertain, human. Every page is heavy with silence, rain, dust, breath. These are not background details. They are part of the story. Because in Vagabond, battles are not just between swordsmen. They are between a man and his own mind. Each duel becomes a dialogue with fear, pride, and doubt. Inoue shows us that Musashi's greatest opponent was never another warrior. It was the self that refused to be still. The manga's visual language carries the same depth as Musashi's philosophy. Long stretches of silence, pages without dialogue, moments where nothing happens, and yet everything changes. These scenes reflect the very essence of Musashi's teachings, that wisdom is not gained through noise, but through awareness. Inoue once said, "I did not draw Musashi. I lived with him." And indeed, Vagabond feels less like a story being told, and more like a consciousness being shared. It's not only about the sword. It's about the weight of being alive. Through Vagabond, Musashi becomes more than history. He becomes reflection. The reader is invited to experience his loneliness, his hunger for purpose, his gradual understanding of emptiness. This is not glorification, but revelation. The art, painted in rough brushstrokes and soft grays, mirrors Musashi's own contradictions: power and tenderness, chaos and stillness, violence and grace. The ink seems alive, breathing between worlds, the world of legend and the world of introspection. Today, Vagabond is considered one of the most profound reinterpretations of Musashi's legacy. It bridges ancient philosophy and modern art, showing that the way still speaks, even through paper and ink. Inoue's Musashi reminds us that mastery is not about dominance. It's about perception. To see clearly, to live deliberately, to let go when holding on no longer serves. That is the spirit both Musashi and Vagabond share. And perhaps that is why this story endures. Because every generation finds itself somewhere on that same path, wandering, questioning, learning to walk alone. He walked alone, but not apart. The silence he found was not an escape from the world. It was the world itself, stripped of noise, stripped of wanting. Musashi's path ended in a cave, but the way he followed never ends. It moves through time, through every hand that still seeks clarity, through every mind that dares to be still. His story was not about swords. It was about seeing. It was about learning to face the world without armor and to meet yourself without fear. The discipline of solitude, the art of strategy, the scrolls of the way, all of it pointed to one simple truth: that mastery was never about power. It was about understanding. To master yourself is to master the world, because the world is only ever seen through you. So when the noise fades and the road grows quiet, remember this: the way does not ask for belief, only for awareness. Sit with that silence. Listen to it. It is the same silence Musashi heard, the one that remains when everything else is gone.